Hello, I'm Trisha G.
I'm Holly Cummins.
And we're going to be talking to you about developer productivity and how it's related to developer joy. Also, we both have clickers, and last time we gave this presentation, we were fighting over which slides were going to happen. So what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, actually, there was two bad consequences that we only discovered much later, which is both of our clickers never worked again after we shared. We did the presentation together. So you can pair two clickers to one laptop, but
then they'll never work again.
Yeah. And on the surface, this talk seems like a terrible idea because my day job is developer joy and Trisha's day job is developer productivity. And it seems like actually those have nothing in common. Those are the exact opposite. But I think maybe that's not quite true.
Hopefully we'll convince you that that's not necessarily true, especially because, you know, our bosses don't want to invest in our joy, but they might invest in our productivity.
Mm-hmm. And the starting question really is, why are we here? Which is quite
a bit existential.
Yeah, that's a very big question. So we'll scale it down a little bit to, is development supposed to be fun? And definitely there are a lot of people who maybe think it's not. Is anyone here Swiss?
Okay, so you're only going to offend a few people.
Yes, I apologize in advance to the Swiss contingent because I'm about to tell you a story that I was told that took place in Switzerland. And a developer was working away on his code, and it was going well. It was that flow moment when, you know, the code is flowing, the bugs are getting fixed, and so he was smiling. And a prowling project manager came up behind him, which is what project managers do. And the project manager said, "Why are you smiling?" And the developer said, "Because the code's going well." And the project manager said, "No, work is not a place to be happy."
Aren't we supposed to say, "Okay, boomer," to that?
Yeah. And hopefully the project manager was wrong. And certainly, there's lots of evidence that the project manager was wrong, starting way back with Fred Brooks.
Fred Brooks has all the answers to everything. Everything that you've thought about that you think is new is in the Mythical Man Month. It's already been said in the 1970s, 80s. But he talks about the joys of the craft. And he says, there are many things that make programming a fun thing. And now I wish I'd worn my glasses because I can't read it. The sheer joy of making things. And I think this probably resonates. Probably one or more of these will resonate with most of you. And if it doesn't, then you might want to go home.
Sorry.
The sheer joy of making
We've
things.
offended the Swiss.
And we'll offend everyone else.
Yeah.
The pleasure of making things that are useful to other people. This makes us feel happy. The fascination of fashioning complex puzzle-like objects of interlocking moving parts and watching them work. That's fun. The joy of always learning. I don't know, some people are not so excited about always learning. If only things would stay still and we could just learn the one thing and keep that. And the delight of working in such a tractable medium. So Fred Brooks says that we do enjoy our jobs. People who become programmers do it because it's fun. It's a fun thing to do.
And
sorry, I clicked.
Oh, we both clicked. We both clicked. We've done it wrong. Catastrophe. When Fred Brooks talks about the joy of the craft, I think, you know, he is 100% right. I think we've all felt that joy of making things. But he's also kind of taking a slightly selfish perspective. I code because coding is fun. Coding makes me happy. It feels so good to code. But we can look at the bigger picture. And even when we look at that bigger picture, that joy that we personally feel when coding then translates into something that's good for other people as well. And Fred Brooks knew this 40 years ago, but actually this is something that we've known for way, way longer. This is something that we've known for 2,000 years. So Aristotle said, actually, I'll let you read that, Trisha. Oh, sorry.
My ancient Greek is a bit rusty.
Sorry, let me fix that. Modern Greek, much easier.
Okay, no.
No, okay. What Aristotle said was that pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And when we feel good making something, when we are enjoying making something, that enthusiasm means that the quality is better. And again, you know, Fred Brooks said it, Aristotle said it, and we can really prove this as well. And we can prove this in all sorts of domains, not just software engineering. One of my favorite studies about the value of play is from agriculture. And so this is nothing to do with people or software. It's to do with piglets. If piglets play more, they grow faster. And of course, for farms and pigs, growing faster then turns into revenue.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, we won't go there. So hopefully that's not our fate as software developers. But and with this study, I think there's sort of a bit of a question about the which direction the causation goes. Are the piglets growing more because they're playing more, or do they play more because they're healthy piglets which have more energy? But that doesn't really matter. The point is that this correlation is there. Play turns into profit. And, we see this in pigs, and we see this in developers as well. So when they did the first round of Doro research, what they found was that job satisfaction, how happy employees are, is the #1 predictor of organizational performance, and therefore profit. And again, there's so many studies that show this. Fun is good for business. Fun is good for business. We can just keep finding more and more research. And we can quantify it as well. This isn't just sort of a high level, fun is good for business. We can put exact numbers on it. So if your brain is in a positive mindset, it is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. That is a huge benefit. If you go to your boss and say, I know how to make us 31% more productive, your boss would be like, yes, tell me what it is. And then you say, we need to get a positive mindset. And then the question is, okay, but how do we do that? It's not as easy as just watching cat videos at work. It is actually literally as easy as watching cat videos at work. Because there was another study, and what they found was that if you show people a comedy video, they do 12% better on a test. They had 12% more productivity. So 12%, not quite as much as 31%, but still, if you went to your boss and said, I can make us 12% more productive, they'd say yes, and then you say cat videos, and then they'd show you to the door, and that would be the end of your career. So you do have to take this message a little bit carefully.
Don't show them what causes the 12%, just watch the cat videos, and then afterwards say, 12% happier. Right, so that leads us to the question. So development is fun. We have fun while we're developing, and fun has business value. So why are our jobs not fun? Should we do a quick poll? And assuming your bosses aren't in the audience. Yeah. Okay, if your boss is in the audience, you don't have to answer this question. Who thinks their job is fun sometimes? Wow, that's great. I don't think we need to give this talk. Okay. Who thinks their job is, not fun sometimes? The same people. Yeah. That's good. I mean, really, that's what our jobs are like. We enjoy bits that we enjoy, and then there's bits that aren't fun. And so for the purposes of this presentation, the things we're talking about are things like toil, stuff that's frustrating, stuff that adds friction, things that gets in the way. And the thing about some of this toil is that it sometimes creeps up on us, and we don't really notice that we're paying this cost all the time. So we are like the little froggy being frog boiled to death, where I realized the other day that someone doesn't know about frog boiling, that the idea is you put a frog in a cool bit of water and you gently bring it up to the boil until the frog doesn't notice and it dies. Except we found out last week that...
Yes, was it Kent Beck?
Kent Beck.
Yes, Kent Beck. See, Kent Beck has the answer to everything. He's like Fred Brooks, except not as old. And Kent Beck gave this really interesting talk about lots of software engineering things, and then he also threw in the most important fact, which is that frog boiling is a myth. If you put a frog in boiling water, it doesn't jump out, it just goes, oh my god, I'm dead. And if you put a frog in cold water and slowly heat it, the frog goes, it's getting a little bit uncomfortable in here, and jumps out. Frog boiling, total myth. If you take one thing from this talk, it's that frog boiling is a myth.
But also, we hope that you take out the fact that you could be the frog and you can jump out at the point where you're like, nope, I do not want this anymore. So this lack of joy can creep up on us, but we can do something about it. And we can look at the things which are causing us toil and friction and try and get rid of some of those things which are boiling us to death.
And this is really worthwhile, because if you look at the kind of things that we don't enjoy at work, usually the things that make us go, oh, is the things that are repetitive. It's work that is meaningless. And again, that when you start to say, well, this is repetitive and meaningless, that's a little bit of a red flag of, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Does this actually have value if it's repetitive and meaningless? And fundamentally, these tasks almost always are low value, and that's why we hate doing them, is because we hate wasting our time. And these tasks are repetitive, and they're repetitive.
Are they? I didn't think you said that.
Yeah, no, I think they might be a bit repetitive and redundant. I definitely didn't say redundant.
No.
We can say they're redundant and repetitive. Repetitive?
How many of these have we got to go? Is there another one?
No,
red flag.
One more red flag. But you can see, like, even just me standing up here saying repetitive 4 times, you're like, oh, stop it already, this is annoying. But that's what happens to us at work all of the time. We just have to repeat things, and it's annoying, and there's no value, so we need to stop it. But then the question is, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we jump out of that water? And so what we're trying to say, is the business problem that we want to solve is, how do developers become more productive? And the answer, which is kind of awesome, is that how do developers become more joyful? If we can fix that problem, we can fix the other problem as well.
And it works both ways. Like, if we're joyful, we're productive. And if we're productive, we're joyful because we like that feeling of being productive.
And so what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through, that's the sort of the theory bit, and we're going to talk through some of the practical things that you can do at your work to become happier and more productive.
Well, the first section really is about trying to get rid of some of that toil and frustration, because you can't really get on with other stuff if you have all this stuff slowing us down. So the first thing to do is get computers to do the boring stuff. Is this why we talk about AI?
Not yet, not yet. But this is one of my favorite tips, because if we automate all the things, then we can do the fun stuff and make the computer do the boring stuff. And, well, actually, we might come to AI now, because right now, computers have no expectation of having fun. They don't sort of say, oh, my job was really unsatisfying because I had to do all of this boring stuff. Give it 10 years, and maybe maybe we'll be in the Skynet scenario where they're really annoyed because we made them do all the boring stuff, and they come seeking revenge on humans because we made them do our expense reports. But we're not there yet. So
and I do always say please and thank you to the robots, just in case, because you never know. Be nice to them.
Yeah. But ultimately, automate all the things. And this has 2 benefits. One is that we get rid of the boring stuff. But the other benefit is that the way we do it, the way we write automation, is to write code. And that brings us to the next solution, which is we want to be getting to a place where we are writing more code. We became developers because coding was fun. So let's do that.
Let's write more code. Code is great. We love writing code. So our solution is to write more code. And it's a double win, because not only are we having fun writing code, but we're also being productive and doing what the business wants and releasing features or fixing bugs.
And you may think this is quite obvious. We are developers. Of course we write code. Actually, when you look at the big picture, we tend to not write that much code. And again, this is something that's been true since Fred Brooks wrote. He estimated that a developer wrote 10 lines of code per day. And you might write a lot more, but then you end up throwing them out, or they don't work, or you have to spend a while debugging. And so even though this number seems quite unrealistic, and we say, well, that was 40 years ago, we write much more code than that now. If you kind of look and see how much people are actually doing, if you average it over the year, if you ask on Reddit or Stack Overflow, some people say 12 lines a day.
We've got a 20% increase over the last 40 years.
Yeah. They just needed to watch more cat videos, and they would have been able to achieve that. There's another one on Reddit, 29 lines of code per day. So still sort of same order of magnitude, even with 40 years of advancement. So 40 years wasn't able to fix that, but we can do better, right? We can fix that.
We want to write more code. So how are we going to help people write more code? The thing we want to do is we want to incentivize people to write more code, right? What could possibly go wrong?
Yes. All you need to do to solve a problem is just align your incentives. And so When we decide, as an organization, that our problem is that the developers are not writing enough code, we can fix that by paying bonuses for lines of code.
Oh, I think they've already skipped to the end of this story.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see where this is going to go. And so this team, they would start out, you know, with something like this. And they would say, I am paid by lines of code. I can refactor. So high-value refactoring.
Totally worthwhile.
Totally
Completely
worthwhile.
more valuable, all those extra lines of code.
Yeah. And then they went further as well, and they said, well, let's look at our comments. And actually, I think a lot of us get this with sort of generated Java comments, but they decided to go even further. They started to look at how attractive their comments were, and they said, instead of having one character represent one character, we could do this. Who wouldn't feel delighted to read this code?
It's also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code.
6 lines of code, massive
Fantastic.
bonus. So anybody want to guess how long the experiment lasted in this organization? I think
Someone's seen the talk before.
Yeah. One day.
I love how creative they were in one day. In one day, they went from like just, you know, spreading out an if statement to ASCII doctoring their comments. I would just want to see what this team would do given 30 days. They would be really good at writing lines of code.
Yeah. And maybe the problem here was that we trusted humans to do the job. Maybe what we should be doing instead is automating all the things and getting computers to do the job. Computers could do a much better job of writing more code, right?
I mean, and it's 2024. They don't let us give a talk these days without mentioning AI. So this is where we crowbarred in the AI section. So how can an AI help us write more code? We can just ask it to write some stuff for us, right?
Yeah. AI, I think there is absolutely no question, AI is extremely good at writing code. A while ago,
creating code.
Yes,
might be a slightly different thing.
Yeah. A while ago, I was doing a talk and I was feeling lazy, so I went to ChatGPT to write my demo for me. And so I gave it a prompt, and it came back with some code for a Quarkus entity. And then I thought, yeah, that's good. That was very fast. And then it gave me some more code, and then it gave me some more code. And then it gave me some more code. And at this point, I was really impressed. I was looking at all this code, and I was thinking, wow, it would have taken me absolutely ages to write all this code. It's made me so much more productive.
It's because you're not using IntelliJ properly to generate your methods.
But then I looked a little bit more carefully at what was generated, and I realized that 70% of what was generated was unnecessary code that shouldn't be there. And so then I thought, oh, actually, maybe this is the exact same thing as that incentive to make, to generate code, except we've given the incentive to the AI. And the way these systems are trained, there's a bias to produce a lot of code, even if actually a short amount of code would solve the problem more effectively. And we've made LLMs really, really good at writing code. In general, in 2024, LLMs not so good at deleting code. And I think that's a problem, and something that we need to be careful about when using these systems is that there's this sort of illusion of productivity, but actually it's not a million miles different than the ASCII art comments.
Right, it's the same focus on, it's the creating the lines of code, which is the thing which is productive and useful, instead of the focus on what is it we're really trying to achieve with this thing. We don't, Dan North said it last week in Go to Copenhagen, our job is not to write code, our job is to deliver a working solution for a thing, which might be done by writing some lines of code. Oh, I don't like putting this up because it says Visual Studio, and I'm just not very keen. But the point about this particular piece is what was the right words it uses? Downward pressure on code quality. New GitHub Copilot research finds downward pressure on code quality. I think that's a really PR way of saying Copilot was creating a lot of shitty code. I think that's what it's trying to say. But there are studies which show that there's it can create a lot of code, but we have to think about the quality of the code, and it's not just about creating lines of code. So let's have a bit of let's step back from what we were trying to do, because we started off by saying we want to write more lines of code because it's fun. We like code, and the business likes code, or at least they like the output of the code. And we've ended up somewhere trying to tell the computers to create more lines of code for us. And I don't really feel like there's an awful lot of productivity or joy in this particular solution.
Yeah, getting the computer to write the code, I think it's going really, really well in terms of the volume of code. But I'm not sure it's going so well in terms of the impact on the organization, in terms of code quality and the maintenance overhead of all of that code. And I think in some ways, this is sort of trying to solve the wrong problem, because the problem shouldn't be let's generate as much code as possible. The problem should be let's make developers as effective as possible. And so often what we shouldn't be doing is provide tooling so that developers can, in a fairly mindless way, generate huge, huge amounts of code. It's let's make our programming models more expressive so that that code isn't even needed in the first place, because we spend so much more time reading code than writing code. And so we really do want to focus on expressiveness for developers and meaningfulness for people reading it. And this is where Quarkus comes in. There's lots of good things to say about Quarkus, but what I really want to talk about here is that emphasis on developer joy, on that human productivity. And we do this in a few ways. So one of the things that we do is live coding, so you can just type away and your changes will be available without having to stop and restart. There's various other things, but I want to talk specifically about the programming model, because there's a whole bunch of places in the programming model where we've said, don't make the human tell the computer what the computer already knows. That's boring for the human. The computer doesn't really mind, but it doesn't help the computer either, because the computer already knows it. And this is one of my favorite examples. This is classic Java logging. And I would point, but the screen is much too big. But you can see that this is class myService. And I initialize my logger, and I say, this is class myService. The computer already knows it's class myService because it's one line away. The computer's not going to get that wrong. Whereas I, as a human, am actually pretty likely to get that wrong, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that code and I'm going to copy-paste it from another class, and then I'm going to have this hard-coded constant, which is noise and incorrect. And so what the Quarkus team have done is they said, well, what if we just got rid of that? And so you can use a static logger instead, and you don't have to tell it the class name, and the class name is correct. And there's all sorts of examples of this. So for example, normally if you're doing an application, you have to declare it. That's kind of pointless. This is obviously an application. That's why I wrote it. So you can just get rid of that code. And there's some others as well that are quite powerful and quite interesting. So with Hibernate is incredible. But you do end up having to write a reasonable amount of boilerplate with Hibernate that ends up looking the same for various classes, for things like queries and that kind of thing. And the dream would be if you could inherit those from a superclass. Normally, you can't do that because they're specific to the entity. And so instead, you have to have code like that, which you can't read. And the reason you can't read it is because there is too much code. And so what we can do instead is we can have Hibernate with Panache, and then it's a much smaller amount of code. And you can see the magic is that it's inheriting, well, actually it's implementing, but the Panache repository. And so we've just managed to move all of that code to the superclass, and because of stuff that happens at build time, it all works. I've got one last example, which again, I really like. Test containers, amazing technology. We should all be using it. It solves so many problems. The test containers programming model, it's not that big, but if you're using test containers in a sort of a vanilla environment, you do have to do some typing. If you're using Quarkus, in order to use test containers, all you have to do is nothing at all. So if you have, for example, a dependency on a Postgres database and you're running in dev mode, we say, well, you seem to be depending on a Postgres database and you don't have a Postgres database configured. Let me just use test containers to spin one up for you, and then everything works without having you having to do this boring boilerplate. And then as well, if you have something like migrations or flyway, then it will just auto-run those as well. So it's really nice.
But I don't think those 10 lines of code that Fred Brooks' developers were writing were boilerplate. In fact, if they were writing 10 lines of boilerplate every day, they were not doing anything at all. So I mean, it's great to get rid of all of that boilerplate, and it's good for readability and understandability, but that's not the only thing which is slowing down developers. So what else are developers doing? When we were talking earlier on about frustration and toil, it's not necessarily just because we're writing lines of code that we don't want to write. We're not sat there in between the other 90% of our time going, I'm just going to sit here and wait to write my next line of code. Developers are doing other things, like presumably building the system. I work for Gradle these days, so we do a lot of talking about build systems. So if you spend a lot of time waiting, so this is a bit of a precursor for my talk tomorrow, by the way. So I'm going to highlight some of the features I'm going to talk about in my talk tomorrow, which is at 10-something. So please feel free to come to my talk tomorrow to find out more. So if your build is taking a long time, you can use something like a build cache. This data is a rough approximation of the data of the Spring Boot project building with a build cache. So originally it would take 20 minutes, and with a build cache out of the box without any tweaks, it would took just over 3 minutes. So you get like a 6x improvement in time by using a build cache. So we can use technologies to help speed up some of the things which take ages and slow us down.
And we take advantage of this in Quarkus because we have a lot of integrations, we have a lot of libraries. Our build takes a long time, and we parallelize it, but then it means that there's a queue for the machines. And so by taking advantage of the build cache, it means we make our builds faster, so then we get faster feedback as developers.
And the build cache that we have in Develocity works for Gradle, Maven, SBT, and Bazel as well. So it's not just a Gradle thing, just to put that out there. But build caches are not solely related to just the Gradle thing. So take a look at build caches, because they do help to speed up your build. Another thing that slows developers down, and I have a whole other talk on this, which I gave here last year, is testing. And writing tests, running tests, and spending time waiting for the feedback from your test results. So we can use a number of different automation techniques to speed up the running of our tests. The first one we can use is predictive test selection. For example, the predictive test selection that we use inside Develocity is based off something from a Meta white paper about using machine learning to look at how your tests are run in your own CI environment, which tests tend to fail with which types of code. So when I commit these lines of code in this area, I'm only going to run this limited subset of tests. So I don't need to rerun all of my tests every single time. And it's trained on your own code base so that you know that you're getting the right kind of results. I'm going to talk about this a bit more tomorrow as well.
But yeah, I mean, I love this so much because it just makes so much sense. Because I think this solves such a problem where, as developers, we end up sort of trying to manually guess which tests to run because the whole suite takes too long, and then we end up trying to manually trim out tests because the whole tests, but we get it wrong. So the computer is much more able than a person to predict what tests need to be run.
And the next technology we can use is to go parallel. We always know if we have a long-running process or long-running processes, we kind of want to run them in parallel, not serial. So another solution is test distribution, which, again, is something that Develocity can provide, but also you can write these kinds of things yourself. So if you have, and what's nice about test distribution, obviously, in CI, I assume you're running your tests parallel on a bunch of different agents, but test distribution can actually run for local tests as well. So you can run all of your tests locally, get the test distributor to distribute them across a bunch of different agents, which might be running on your laptop or some cloud stuff or some PC that's lying around there. So you can distribute your tests so you can run them sort of massively parallel. And again, this will help shorten things down. So if you're using a combination of a build cache, which won't build stuff that doesn't need to be built, plus predictive test selection, which only runs a subset of your tests, plus test distribution to run them in parallel, you can really shorten your feedback time. So you're not waiting so long for these kind of boring processes to finish to get on with the next thing that you want to do. Flaky tests. I have a whole presentation on flaky tests, so I'm going to try not to rant too much about flaky tests.
Flaky tests are the worst.
They are the worst. Let's say you spent all this time, actually, you've invested time, effort, and energy in writing automated tests, and you even pay attention to the results of them, and then results, sometimes just, they're not what you expect them to be, and they pass and they fail. And it drives me, personally, crazy. And I know that I'm not the only one who suffered from flaky tests.
Yeah, this is a problem that every code base, once it gets to a certain size, is going to have this problem. And then it becomes really difficult for people to know whether it's their problem or someone else's problem. And so we have this in Quarkus, where you'll make a change, and you'll run the build, and it will run the test suite, and there's a failure. And then you think, well, I don't think my change could have caused that, but I don't want to merge broken code. And so what we do is we go, Guillaume, my CI shows that there's a failure here. I don't think that's me. And then Guillaume goes, oh, yes, yes, I saw that. And then it happens again. Guillaume, my CI shows this. And Guillaume goes, yes, yes, I recognize that failure. Guillaume, have you seen this failure? Yes. And so this process works kind of OK for us, but I don't think it's very exciting for Guillaume, who just gets all of this. Is Guillaume here, by the way? Guillaume is at DevOps, and he did a talk earlier.
If he was here, I wouldn't be able to see anyway. These lights are really bright.
That's true, yes. And so doing the process this way, where you just have, and I think every team has this, where you have your one person who is the font of all knowledge, and they know the state of the build. And so you have to kind of run your flaky tests past this person. And it's just not, it doesn't work very well.
It's not scalable.
No.
And it's very sad for poor Guillaume.
Yes. So what we were able to do with Quarkus is we were able to do an auto Guillaume. We didn't call it that. This is just my name for it. I'm not sure whether Guillaume actually likes the name, but he's not here, so it's OK.
Do you know there was actually a tool in LMAX that was called Auto Trish? It was the same thing.
And so now what happens is when we run a build, we get a report at the end, and it will say, these tests failed. These tests failed, but I've seen these failures before, so you don't need to worry about it. It was someone else who broke the build. And this has a couple of benefits. One is it means that we don't need to go to Guillaume, so we've eliminated that. But it also means that if a test isn't actually flaky, we know that, and we can say, oh, actually, this really is me. I'm not just going to assume this is a flaky test, because I can see from the build reports that this is the first time it's ever happened.
I've just realized I don't think I actually told anyone what Develocity was, but anyway. Develocity is Gradle's productivity tool, which Quarkus uses, just to set the scene properly there. And Develocity also does flaky test detection. So it will, there's two different mechanisms to find out which tests are flaky, but one of the nice things about it is when your test fails, it will tell you whether it's a flaky test or a failed test. So at least, the flaky test is still driving you crazy, but at least you know which ones are the failures and which ones are the flaky tests. And just the last thing I want to say on flaky tests, though, is don't ignore them just because they're flaky and you know they're flaky. You have to fix them as well.
Yeah, and that's sort of, I was going to say something similar. So I think, at a personal, selfish level, as a developer, I just want to commit my code. Having that reassurance from the CI is really reassuring. But then at that higher product level, from the product quality level, this tooling is really helping us as well. Because we had a thing a while ago where a test was failing every now and then. And we were able to then look at the reports and say, even though this test is flaky, even though we cannot reproduce it at all locally, we're seeing it in about 1% of the runs on CI. And that's a high enough occurrence that we think we need to investigate. And then we were able to pin down when it started occurring from the graph, which otherwise we would have never, with that kind of frequency, we would have never been able to pin down when it started occurring. And because we could see when it started occurring, we could trace it to a code change and realize that there was possibly, a very, very subtle bug in some of the bytecode generation and the statefulness and that kind of thing. And so we were able to detect and fix this problem that otherwise could have been a nasty bug, but would have been hidden by the kind of, oh, well, it's just a flaky test. We can't possibly reproduce it, so let's ignore it.
So the key here, we've talked about a whole bunch of solutions to get over some of the friction and toil and boring stuff and long-winded stuff. So we've done things like we're improving reliability by not writing code that we don't need to write and not accidentally copying and pasting the wrong things. We're improving feedback times by decreasing build cycles, by decreasing the amount of time it takes to run our tests. And we're getting more visibility over the actual test failures and which ones are a real problem or not. So we're getting rid of toil, but we're also making our tool chain much more reliable and consistent, and we are getting much better data on some of the things we're doing as we put our code closer to production. And last year's DORA report said, strong reliability practices predict better operational performance, team performance, and organizational performance. So what this is saying is that if you have a culture of reliability, of tooling, of repeatability, you get
sorting out your flaky tests.
Of sorting out your flaky tests, fix your tests. You get better performance at all levels, at the individual level, at the team level, and at the organizational level.
And
sorry, I've skipped ahead.
Oh, yeah. But this is so, I think this is so important and so good, because what it means is that if you invest in fixing those flaky tests, then it means it's less frustrating for you as a developer, but then it means that the product is a better quality, and then we can trace that directly then back to that higher level organizational performance. So it's a win at every single level selfishly, but then also for the organization.
So this is great. We've optimized a whole bunch of stuff, and we've talked about using machining and taking down the amount of time we spend on dumb stuff that we don't want to do. But this isn't everything that we do. And we also haven't talked much about fun yet, which we will get to. We have 7 minutes to go through the fun stuff.
That says 14 minutes.
14 minutes. Well, I'm reading that wrong then. We've got 14 minutes. We've got loads of time to have fun. Fantastic. Great. I was panicking. I was like, I'm going to have to do this super fast. So we've talked about optimizing the things while we're writing the code. But what else is it that developers spend their time on? There was a study in 2019, which I'm starting to realize now is a long time ago. Oh. It's really quite scary. And the study shows that of all the time that developers spend, they probably only spend about 32% of their time writing code. Who would agree with that? Who thinks they spend less time than 30% writing code? Yeah. Who thinks they spend more than 30% of their time writing code? Oh, nice. We should hire those people.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why we only get 10 lines of code a day. We're not writing code.
We're not writing code. We're doing other stuff. We're doing, I love the fact that this actually has a section called Other, and I really want to know what is in Other. But what we're doing with these tools that we've been looking at so far, we're optimizing a small part of what we do. So we're not actually looking at the bigger picture of what we're spending our time doing as developers, and we're not necessarily freeing up very much time to do other things that we want to do.
And this matters because I think we do need to start looking at that bigger picture, because everybody knows what gets measured gets optimized, which is why you end up with people making their comments prettier, because that got measured. And so as developers, we're very good at optimizing it.
So let's talk a little bit about how to measure developer productivity. I really hate saying those words because people just jump automatically to the wrong kinds of measurements. But there is a framework, and framework makes it sound a bit more structured than it really is. But there is a framework to think about how to measure developer productivity, and it's the SPACE framework by the same people who did Dora as well. And so SPACE is satisfaction and well-being, performance, activity, communication and collaboration, efficiency and flow. So there's a whole bunch of different things that we could measure. And they specifically say don't measure all of them because that's too much information. You can't do anything about it. Like pick like 3 things and measure those and then change it over time. When we talk about developer productivity, we almost always are measuring activity. We're almost always looking at commits, lines of code, pull requests,
how fast is the hamster wheel going?
Exactly. So we're always looking at this one thing, and it's because it's easy to measure those things. It reminds me of this thing of the story of the drunk looking under the lamppost for his keys. So he's looking around, and someone comes along and says, "What are you looking for?" And I lost my keys. And so, where did you last have them? Over there. But this is where it's light, so this is where I'm going to look for them. Like, okay, that's not very helpful. So what we need to be doing is that we measure a lot of activity because activity is easy to measure. But as we saw, the activity in terms of lines of code is not necessarily where developers are spending all their time, and it's not the full picture either because we're not looking at satisfaction. How happy are they with the jobs? And we saw in the earlier slide about the Dora report, satisfaction is a key indicator of organizational performance. So what we're really interested in, certainly from a developer point of view, is satisfaction and well-being and efficiency and flow. And we all love to be in this state of flow because that's where we really feel productive. Years ago, I used to work with Dave Farley, and we used to pair a lot. And so I would sit there and I'd pair with him. And I'm sat there typing. And I can't actually see what's going on. Typing. But Dave would not be typing. He would be sat there and he would be thinking. And I'm like, but he's not doing anything. Like,
it's a good job the project manager wasn't there.
Right, because maybe he was thinking with a smile on his face. Yeah. That would be the worst. And so, but Dave is one of the best programmers I know. But he's one of the best programmers I know, not because he sits there typing stuff into the keyboard, or not even because he's effective with IntelliJ IDEA, which he is, but because he sits back and he thinks, right, what problem are we really trying to solve? Where is the right place to put this? And he might look around the code, but he's not going to dive straight in and start writing lines of code. That's why we only write 10 lines of code a day, because a lot of what we should be doing is thinking and reasoning and what we're going to do. But if we keep cramming our day full of things to do, whether it's meetings or whether it's using AI to generate more code or whether it's even, optimizing things so that our build is faster, we shouldn't necessarily be using the space that we make by making things more efficient to write more lines of code. We should be perhaps creating boredom. Why would we want to be bored?
Yeah, this sounds absolutely ridiculous. And so again, if you leave this talk and you go back to your boss and you say, first of all, we're going to watch cat videos, and second of all, we're going to create boredom, the conversation isn't going to be a good one.
And they're going to tell you not to go to any more conferences.
Yeah. So when you talk to your boss, what you say instead is, I would like to create space. And then that sounds a little bit more appealing. And again, this is because you want to eliminate waste, but you don't want to optimize yourself so much that any sort of possibility for thinking in space and thinking is solved, because that actually isn't helpful. You don't want the toil, but you do need to leave a little bit of idleness. And again, this is something that it's a little bit counterintuitive, but there's quite solid scientific evidence for it. And at a sort of a neuropsychology level, what we can trace it back to is something called the default mode network. And so what this is if they stick people into an MRI scanner and they look at what parts of their brain are more active, depending on what they're doing, they can see that there's a network of areas in the brain that if people are doing nothing at all, this area of the brain gets more active. And so then the question is, okay, well, if you do nothing, this part of the brain becomes more active. What's going on in this part of the brain? What kinds of things is this part of the brain good at? And it's stuff like problem solving. It's also stuff like mental time travel, which I love because it makes it sound sort of, like Terminator again, except without Skynet. But really, what's going on here is that sort of that problem solving. And I think if you think about yourself and how you solve problems, this is probably familiar, because what many of us do to solve problems is take showers. And the great benefit of a shower is partly that you get clean, but also that there are no computers in showers. You cannot be doing something else in the shower. So you have to just sort of stop and think. And there was research which was sponsored by a shower company, so I don't think it has quite the same credibility as some of the others. But what they found was that about 70% of people have their best ideas in the shower, and 14% took showers specifically for the purpose of coming up with ideas. There is a bonus that you get clean. The downside is it's very expensive and it destroys the planet. So there are alternative techniques that have a similar benefit. One is running. Bonus with running is that you get fit and you don't destroy the planet and you have ideas. There's other things that you can do as well.
So I took up knitting a few years ago, so I brought my knitting, and this is not a prop, I actually bring it with me everywhere, but I'm going to need to untangle this. So I do a bunch of knitting, and I do it when, I do it in meetings. My boss has got used to seeing me in a meeting doing knitting, and that actually means that I'm paying attention, because if there's a meeting and I'm not knitting, but the subject is slightly off to one side of something I'm interested in, then I'm going to check my phone and not pay attention. So knitting helps me to stay a bit more focused, do something with my hands. And it's also great if I want to come up with an idea, it forces me to just not browse the internet and just be right, I have to sit here and do this thing, and then your mind just bubbles up ideas. Or not, it doesn't have to,
And I think that's the sort of a similar benefit to what I get when I'm running, which is that there is no internet while running. And so I work through so many problems. And it's gotten to the level now that I then need a way to record all the ideas, because otherwise I forget them as soon as I get back to my desk and see all the emails and that kind of thing. So I would recommend voice memos on the watch to record ideas, so you can record it, but then you can't get distracted by the internet.
I actually tried to set that up on my watch, and it wasn't easy because technology sucks. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to have to remember it like an old-fashioned person.
Yeah. The problem with the voice memos is that when I listen to it back, because I'm running and because I'm not very good at running, I sound like I'm dying. So it's sort of, I get a bit concerned for myself when I listen to it back. It's a bit embarrassing, but it does mostly work.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do to kind of help your brain get into that state. Knitting, running, walking, showers, gardening, unloading the dishwasher, colouring. I love the colouring one. I was painting the other day. It was quite good. And laundry. Oh, God, I hate the laundry so much. But I'll quite often, because I work at home, like I know a bunch of us do, I will quite often take myself away from the desk and put the laundry on or unload the dishwasher, because you know that you know when you're sat there spinning at the desk and you know you're not doing anything because you think you're solving a problem, but you're not. You're just clicking around the code and you've got no idea. So all these things can kind of help get you in the right place. And I recognize some of this has different mileage depending on the sort of office environment you work in. But what you want to do is try and find some way to unlock that default mode network.
And a bonus of doing the laundry or unloading the dishwasher is that at the end of it, your dishes are done and your laundry is clean.
A double win of productivity.
Yeah, and similarly with knitting, you get this double win, which is that you stay focused in meetings and you get new clothes at the end of it. And you get new clothes.
Last time I interviewed Holly, I was actually wearing the top that I was knitting on stage the previous time we gave this presentation. It was super cool. Well, it wasn't cool, actually, because London was really hot that day and I was sweating underneath it, but it was quite fun.
And I think probably most of us, again, if we have that conversation with our manager and we say, I'm knitting on meetings and it helps me focus, I think, it's like, yeah, okay, I can see that. But there are some things that we do at work or when we're supposed to be working that are a bit harder to justify in terms of like, oh, I'm really working while I'm unloading the dishwasher, honestly. Many years ago, I was in an office and we were working late and we had too much work to do, and a very serious colleague of mine picked up a bag of Maltesers, and he didn't eat the Maltesers. What he did instead was he took a fan that we also had running in the office because it was a hot day, and he started feeding the Maltesers into the fan to see what happened. And this is the kind of thing you are never going to have this conversation with your manager to say, oh yeah, I was working really hard, I was feeding Maltesers into the fan. And I'm sorry as well, because I know I'm in Belgium, the land of chocolate, and I'm telling stories of chocolate abuse. And it is hard to justify this chocolate abuse in all sorts of ways, because of the chocolate, because of the mess, because it was clearly not work.
I feel for the cleaner, really. Yeah. Like, what happened here?
Yeah. But I am going to try and justify the unjustifiable, because we work in a creative industry, and play is such a huge part of creativity. And so even when we do these things that have no obvious business value at all, and we can't even make any kind of link, it still helps us, because creativity solves problems. Creativity brings joy. We should be doing more play. We should be having more joy. So, really, we should be embracing that dead time. Use it well. Use it for things like problem solving. Use it for thinking. Use it for staring into space. That's okay, even if you can't measure the benefit. It's okay. Use it for play. Even if you can't even possibly justify a benefit, it's okay. Don't optimize yourself to that point where you're just, don't have any space, because it's not going to give you the outcomes that you think. And so then, going back to this chart of where we spend our time, all of this is productive. And so I would argue that this is a terrible mistake. And we should, in fact, be having something a bit more like this, where we have more time just sat doing nothing.
Maybe it's more time for the other.
Yeah.
So we need to be making time for boredom. It's important to release our brains from this constant from task to task to task. And we need to make time for play. So this is super important. And if we go back to the SPACE framework, the S was developer satisfaction, which is one of the important metrics for not just developer productivity, but for organizational productivity.
And we tend to think of it as a trade-off of, joy and productivity. But what this shows us is that we can actually get that double win. in some circles, this is called co-benefits or a win-win. I always sort of try and think of like what the best name for it is. You know, if you're American, you call it a twofer, but nobody else knows what that is necessarily. I asked for ideas, and someone suggested that I should call it the Überwinden. I'm not German. I don't speak German. This sounded really cool to me. And then I showed it to a German person, and then I realized that the person who had suggested it clearly didn't speak German either, because this is actually not at all what Überwinden means. But it looks really good, and it's got an umlaut. So
exactly, it's got an umlaut. How can it not be good?
I'll take it. But you know, ultimately, no matter what you call it, the fundamental principle is that instead of happiness and productivity being this trade-off where we have to choose one or the other, it's not a trade-off. We can have both, and we will get better results if we have both. So we need to move from this sort of zero-sum idea where we choose one or the other to something bigger and better.
There's a quote from the book called The Goal, which says, "The only initiatives which will positively impact performance are ones which will increase throughput while simultaneously decreasing cost." So you can't just do one thing. You can't just decrease cost, because you will also decrease throughput. You can't just kind of put pressure on people to write more lines of code, because the quality gets bad. So you need to be looking for something which is the double win.
So we're out of time, so we will quickly go through. Takeaways: be careful how you measure productivity. It should not be lines of code. Automate the drudgery that stops you being productive. Happiness makes you better at your job. It does not make you a bad developer. And doing things like having showers or long walks or knitting also makes you better at your job, which is the double win. So thank you very much. That's it. If you would like, we have like 6 million calls to action on here. So if you would like to win Trisha's book, there's a QR code. If you would like the slides, there is another QR code. And if you would like stickers, we have stickers. And if you would like another Trisha talk, there's one tomorrow. And I will be talking more about Quarkus today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.